All right, so this is actually a two-part lecture. Today and then next Wednesday, we're going to do part 1 and part 2. Right, that was redundant, of course. It's U.S. foreign policy on the Middle East. And because I have 2 lectures to cover material that should probably be covered in about 32 lectures, I'm going to take some time to actually define our terms. And then what I'll try and do is give you more of an overarching view of what the U.S. has done as opposed to just giving you a bunch of specifics, although I will give you specifics as well. Let's start with a simple issue that haunts the Middle East, and that is its term. So first of all, usually when people mean Middle East, they mean Turkey, Iran, and then the entire Arabian Peninsula, plus Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, Egypt. Sometimes they include Afghanistan and Pakistan, and even, but this is probably not good, they'll throw in the Sudan. The term Middle East was originally designated by the British to mean what we now often refer to as South Asia or the Indian subcontinent. So India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and actually Tibet, which is now part of the PRC. So this was the original Middle East. This is what the British called the Near East. And so what happened was the United States decided at the end of World War II that we wanted the Near East to be the Eastern Bloc states. So Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Poland, right? We wanted that to become the Near East, which then meant, since the Near East was this is now the Near East, this needed to be retermed, and so that it was renamed the Middle East. So sometimes you'll hear people call this the Middle East. They're right. Sometimes they'll call it the Near East. They're right. It's got both names because of the strangeness of the U.S. renaming it. Having said that, Middle East is a really strange name because the Near East never took. Right? Nobody called this the Near East. They called it the Eastern Bloc. So that never happened. So this is the Middle East. Middle East of what? Well, to its east is South Asia. To the east of that is East Asia. And then, or sometimes called the Far East. And then, of course, to the west is North Africa. And then to the south is the Horn of Africa. To the north is Central Asia. So it's Middle East, but with the exception of when we use the term Far East, the term is really weird because it's the middle of what? If anything, it's kind of the middle of the world, right? Because here's Europe, here's Africa, here's Asia, and it's at that center point. So if you just called it middle and got rid of east, it would make a hell of a lot more sense. And then if you look at sort of the Asia as a continent, and I'll zoom out for a second. This is a horrible Mercator projection. I am so sorry for subjecting you to this. This is, thank you, Google, for using 400-year-old technology. Greenland, all of it, fits in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So Mercator projections like dramatically exaggerate the north and south parts of the world. But anyway, if you look at it, right, look at Asia, this is about the center. So this thing is actually west of the center. So the Middle East so it's like the US Midwest, which is east of the Mississippi. It's a really strangely named thing. So since we got rid of that, let me just go ahead and tell you what I'm going to do with the term. When I say Middle East, I am going to mean this, but I'm also going to make it less precise, and I'm going to throw in North Africa, because the term is actually constantly being used now. There's this new thing of saying MENA, Middle East, and North Africa. I'm just going to say Middle East, and I'll also include North Africa in this. All right, just so we're clear. So let's break this down ethnically. These states here, as I sweep across instead of naming them all, since you can see them, are Arabic-speaking states, all the way across like this. That's the Arab world. So when people refer to the Arab world, what they mean is the Arabian Peninsula, the Mesopotamia, the Levant, Palestine, and then across, including Chad, and then over to Mauritania. Eritrea also speaks Arabic. And in fact, there's a little bit of Arabic spoken in Djibouti and Somalia. The League of Arab State members include all of the states that I just did, except Chad. By the way, South Sudan, one of its official languages is Arabic. So it's also, at least officially, an Arabic-speaking state. And then Somalia and Djibouti, even though their primary languages are Somali, Arabic sort of a secondary language, they're members of the League of Arab States. Eritrea has said it will eventually join, but hasn't yet done so. So when this is going to happen is a big mystery. Iran and Turkey are not Arab states. The Turks are ethnically Turco-Altaic, culturally, linguistically, they're Turco-Altaic. That puts them in the same group with Mongolians, Koreans, and Japanese. Let that sink in for a while. All right, we're done letting that sink in. And then Iranians, of course, the dominant population are the Persians. Secondarily, there are the Kurds over here and the Baluchis over here. Baluchis, Persians, and Kurds, and then also the Dari and the Tajiks and even the Pashtuns over here. They're all Aryans. They're Indo-Europeans. This part of Iran here has a very large Arab population. In fact, the Arabs are the majority. Over here, this part of Iran is Turkish. This part of Iran is also Turkish. Over here, this is Kurdish, but Kurds are Aryans. So Iran is actually very multi-ethnic, but having said that, the dominant population is Aryan. Arabs are Semites, so they're not really closely related to the Turco-Altaics, who are Asiatic. They're not really closely related to Aryans, who are also Asiatic. Semites, not necessarily ethnically, but linguistically. The Arabic language is extremely closely related to Hebrew, Aramaic, Phoenician. Those are all Semitic languages. And the Semitic languages originated in this area here. What happened was when the Arabs, beginning in 633, began the mass conquest of what is now the Middle East, and obviously up into Spain, and then they went across through Asia into what is now Pakistan. When they began, and they actually went into Central Asia as well, when they did this mass conquest, a huge chunk of the area that they conquered kept Arabic as the dominant language, and that includes North Africa. Ethnically speaking, North Africans are Hamites. The people living here are Semites, but linguistically, the North Africans are now mostly speaking Semitic language, the Semitic language of Arabic. There is Berber, which is spoken across here. There's even Berber pockets as far away as Egypt, and Berber is Hamitic language. And then Coptic, which is the religious language of the Christians of Egypt, that's also a Hamitic language. Technically, the Cushitic languages that are spoken down here are also Hamitic, but here they're dominant, here they're a minority. All right, we good so far? So just so we're clear, when I mean Arab, I really just mean Arab. I don't mean to include Turks and Persians, and I know in common conversation that probably happens for most Americans. Afghans and Pakistanis are also clearly not Arabs. The majority of Afghanistan is either Dari, Tajik, or Pashtun, and those are all actually Persian sub-languages. And then in the north, there's a lot of Turks, especially Uzbeks and Turkmen. And anyway, and then Pakistan is sort of split between being Indian and Persian. The majority of the population is Indian, but geographically the state is split pretty much along the Indus River, with everything west of the Indus being Persian and everything east being Indian. All right. So let's actually peel this thing all the way back to our first, or to the US's first encounter in the Middle East, and that's of course the Barbary pirate event. What happened was when the Arab Empire collapsed, and it collapsed really quite dramatically. It didn't technically last very long. It lasted as an intact entity for about the first 200 years, and then it started to crumble for the next 200 years. By the end of 400 years, the Arab Empire was gone for all intents and purposes. And then eventually what happened was the Arab Empire gets hit by, the remnant states, the fragmented states of the Arab Empire, get hit by three pretty catastrophic events, the first being the Crusades. Estimates are that the Crusades killed about 7 million people, caused massive amounts of disruption. The Crusades captured this territory here. And then that was followed up by the Mongol invasions. The Mongol invasions were much worse than the Crusades, killed about 30 million people. not all Arabs, but the Arabs were a significant portion of that 30 million people, and it wiped out this part of the Arab world. They actually, as they went through Persia, wiped out the Persians nearly completely. I mean, just devastated their populations. And then just in the aftermath of the Mongol invasions, basically the Arabs at that point kind of gave up on Asia, and they fell back to Africa, and that became their strong point. As if that wasn't enough, then in 1347 the bubonic plague breaks out, and the next thing you know, 40% of the Arab world is dead. So we're talking about three extremely catastrophic events starting in 1096 and ending around 1348. So about roughly a 250-year span of time, where by the time they're done, 40% of the Arab population just doesn't, they're not alive anymore. The worst part about this is when a disease like the bubonic plague goes through, it's not going to, if we need the map, I'll pull it back down again. When a disease like the bubonic plague goes through, it doesn't target with indiscriminately. It actually targets very discriminately. It actually aims at the young and the old. The problem with killing the old is they're the ones with the expertise, they're the ones with the information that they're supposed to pass on to the young, right? They're the people who are running the show. The problem with killing the young is then here's the population, the next population of people who are going to come into these positions and eventually take over, and they're gone as well. So that it's actually quite catastrophic. Did a number on Arab civilization, tons of information are lost. And in the aftermath of that, the Arab populations in North Africa get quite desperate and they turn to piracy. Turns out, all you got to do if you want pirates to roam the world is crash somebody's economy and make it so they can't make a living. That's exactly what happened to Somalia, by the way. The Somali pirates who have become so, right, everybody's like, oh, the Somali pirates. They were originally fishermen. And what happened was their economy crashed so badly, they couldn't make money fishing anymore. And so out of desperation, they turned to piracy. If you want to end Somali piracy, the best way to do that would be to restore Somalia's economy. Right? What's our attitude? Let it go. Who cares? We'll just deal with the piracy as it happens. In North Africa, you could avoid North African piracy really simple. And what you could do is you could go to these Barbary pirates, the various pirate states in North Africa, and you could just pay them off in advance. You could just say, okay, look, I'll give you a certain amount of money, and every time you see a ship with a British flag on it, you don't attack it. We decide, Thomas Jefferson decides, we're not going to do this. We're going to go ahead and fight. And so Thomas Jefferson puts together the Marine Corps. This is the birth of the Marine Corps, and sends them to the Mediterranean, all 20 Marines. Once they're in the Mediterranean, they go to the Ottoman Empire and they hire mercenaries, mostly Greeks, but also a bunch of Turks. So it's a Greek Orthodox and Sunni Muslim bunch of mercenaries. I think it was, it's been a while, but I think there's like 500 mercenaries, 20 Marines. The mercenaries are almost entirely Greek Orthodox with a handful of Muslims, and they go and they attack these Barbary pirates. And some of the Barbary pirates actually align with us. So we actually end up in this weird situation where we're fighting some Barbary pirates with the help of other Barbary pirates. And in fact, the celebrated Marine Corps saber was a gift from one of the Arab states in North Africa. The Emir, or Sultan, I don't know his title, simply rewarded us with this saber that we now replicate, and the Marines walk around putting in front of their face, acting all fancy with it. So it's actually an Arab weapon. Isn't that cool? Huh?
What weapon is that?
It's a sword.
What is it called?
Saber, the Marine Corps saber. All right. So right away, because in many ways this is our first major foreign policy maneuver, right away, and we succeed. We pulled this off. We make it so that U.S. shipping can go into the Mediterranean, all 3 ships. Because we're brand new, we're young, we don't even have much of a merchant marine. This isn't like world changing. The Arab world is looking going weird. Right away we get this really strange relationship with the Arab world that's made slightly more complicated and slightly stranger because the first state to ever recognize the United States is none other than the Kingdom of Morocco. So right away we've got this really weird relationship with the Arab world in particular, but just sort of everything from North Africa through the Middle East. Having said that, because we are a minor player, the Middle East falls out of our radar, and we end up becoming very focused on Central America, and even to a lesser degree, Latin America, South America. If you want, you can do this. It's a fun exercise. Do a search, Century of Violence, and then enter Zoltan Grossman, and you'll get a page that shows every time the United States has done a military intervention in the last 120 years, and it's a pretty thorough page. It's a lot. It's last 120 years. It's like 125 military interventions. Now, some of those are local, because Zoltan Grossman puts even the local stuff, miners striking, and then we send in the military and go put down the miners and force them back in the mines like slaves. So there's stuff like that, but then there's also all the times we've invaded other countries. Like, for example, we've invaded Honduras 8 times and Nicaragua 7 times. Like, I think at that point, Honduras and Nicaragua should just have a port facility for the Marine Corps to land in. And you could just have, like automatic American flags pop up when the Marine Corps lands. And then they could just have like English guides show the Marines where everything is that they need to shoot and blow up. Because, 15 times between those two states, something's clearly wrong. Either there's something clearly wrong with our foreign policy or them. More than likely it's us, but we'll just, because they're tiny. So, having said that, the British become very heavily involved in the Middle East. And they become heavily involved for 2 reasons. Early on in Middle East politics, the British become interested in the states that we think of as sort of the small sultanates on the eastern end of the Arabian Peninsula, particularly Oman, what they will eventually call the Trucial Coast. Today it's called the United Arab Emirates. And then even Qatar and Bahrain will get into the mix. And finally Kuwait. Kuwait's the last. And the reason the Brits get involved, initially Oman and the Trucial Coast in the beginning, is because there were pirates on the Trucial Coast that would then go across the Arabian Sea to India and attack English shipping and capture English ships. And the English want this to stop. So they intervene militarily to try and get a deal with the various emirs along the Trucial Coast to force them to stop attacking British shipping. They make a deal with Oman in the process, and eventually they'll make a deal with Qatar and Bahrain. And the weird thing about this is Qatar and Bahrain were actually part of the Ottoman Empire, so one of the things they have to do is get them out of the Ottoman Empire, and the same with Kuwait. In fact, initially the English try to force Kuwait to stay in the Ottoman Empire, but then they change their mind and they help Kuwait get independent. So at first, their interest in the Ottoman Empire's territories in the eastern part of the Arabian Peninsula are more aimed at spice trade with India. But then something goes wrong in British foreign policy, and it's huge disaster for the Brits as far as the Brits are concerned. And that is that their oil company, Shell, gets purchased. It gets purchased by Royal Dutch. You probably can figure out where the Royal Dutch is headquartered. And when Royal Dutch buys Shell, the Dutch end up with 51%, and the British end up with 49% of the company. There are 2 major oil producers in the world at that moment as a result. There's Standard Oil in the United States, and then there's Royal Dutch Shell in the Netherlands. And the Brits have neither. Now, having said that, both the United States and the Netherlands are really good allies of the British. The British figure, right, if that's how it stays the rest of creation, they should be okay. They can rely on the United States and the Dutch to keep the oil flowing. But they don't want to. The British aren't about doing something like that for 2 reasons. One, there's probably money to be made in oil. And that's what the British Empire is all about at the end of the day, right? Making money. 2, what if something goes wrong? For example, Germany's on the rise. What if at some point down the road, Germany manages to pull off an annexation of the Netherlands? What do you do then? And in the United States, the largest ethnic group are Germans, 25%. What if at some point down the road, the Americans decide we're more German than we are English, and we decide to go with Germany after the Germans capture the Netherlands? And you go, well, how big of a concern was this? This was a huge concern for the British because Great Britain's #1 rival is now Germany. The Brits are also interested in the oil for another reason. Not just that you can make money off of it. And it's why they're nervous. It's because they know that this is the future. Right at that moment, in the late 1800s, coal is what's driving the navies of the world. Your ability to secure coal, burn coal in ships, that's what pushes your ships along. But the British can see the writing on the wall. They realize coal's going to get replaced by oil. Oil is way better. It's much easier to transport. You get way more in terms of storage space than you do for coal. That's the future. They don't have coal ships yet. I mean, they don't have oil ships yet, but they know that's the future. When they first start thinking about oil in regards to the Middle East, the car is just being invented by Daimler. So this is not necessarily a pressing issue at the moment, but the British are doing what the British do best, and that is looking to the future. They figured out, we got to do something about this. So the British do something really interesting. If you're going to do oil exploration in a world where you have late 19th century technology, in other words, not a heck of a whole lot. It's not like you can do some sort of crazy imaging from satellites and figure out where the oil is. Well, how do you find it? And here's what they do. They go through and read history books and look to see if there's any reference to oil anywhere. And they find it. It turns out that the Arabs, by the time the Brits are doing this, for almost 1,000 years, had been lighting their streets with oil lamps, which means there's oil somewhere in the Middle East. It means that the Arabs, they don't do it anymore. They weren't doing it anymore at the time. But at one point, they had easy access to oil and were lighting their street lamps at night. If you could take a satellite backwards in time and put it at night and send it around the world, the whole world was pitch black except for the Middle East. The cities twinkled. So the British go, well, let's do this. Let's find this oil source. It must be somewhere. So how do you do that? Well, what you do is you send in people, sometimes without permission, and you start walking around, looking for it. The Earth had so much oil 150 years ago, you could see it. You could actually see it on the surface of the Earth in multiple ways. One way was to step in it, and that's how we look for it in Texas. Right? You're walking along and splooch, and then you look, and if it's black, you found oil. If it's muddy, oh well, you found water. I'm serious. Having said that, there's another way. Black shale. Shale will absorb the oil like a sponge, and so shale isn't normally black. If it's black, it almost certainly means there's oil. And so they just literally send out guys just walking around the Middle East looking for where this oil is. In the meantime, the British are starting to anticipate, okay, if we find it, when we find it, we need to have deals in place already. So one of the places that they go to make a deal is Iran. And the reason they're picking Iran is because they figure they have an easy way to get a deal in Iran. And the easy way is this. The rulers, they're called Qajars. The Qajars are really bad opium addicts. I mean, we're talking over-the-top opium addicts. And the reason the British realize they can make this to their advantage is India and Afghanistan were the world's largest opium producers. And this is why the British are so insistent on trade with China, right? Because China had a bunch of stuff that Britain wanted. Britain had nothing that China wanted. So what the Brits did was they hooked the Chinese on opium and then forcibly, right, it was forced them to trade for opium. The reason it was forced is that the Chinese occasionally would go, we don't want to do this anymore, and they would say no more, and then the British and the French and the Germans would invade China, shoot the place up, and say, no, you're going to take our opium. And they would force them to do it. You know this, right, about the British? First tobacco, then opium. They were just like the original drug dealing empire, only they would force you to take their drugs. Isn't that crazy? Well, that's why they invaded Afghanistan 3 times. The British Empire invaded Afghanistan 3 times, and all 3 times got beaten. They got beaten and humiliated and driven out of Afghanistan. By the time we invade, Afghanistan's nickname is Graveyard of Empires for a reason. It's not, they were just like flipping through, what could we go with? Like Michigan. It's its motto is, if you seek two pleasant peninsulas, look about you, or something goofy like that. Yeah, I was thinking peninsula or island. What should I do? Oh, I'll do peninsula this time. I'm bored with islands. I always feel so trapped. Why would anyone seek a peninsula? Anyway, the British figure, even if they're not in Afghanistan at a given moment, they can still get the opium out of Afghanistan, plus they have the opium they're producing in India, and they can just sell it to the rulers of Persia. And they do. They make this deal. And here's the deal. Any oil that the British find in Persia, Britain will get 95% of the revenue. It's Persian oil, but the British will get 95%. This is, in terms of deals, horrible. If they had had even a slightly decent negotiating team, they should have been able to get 50% of the revenue and let the British have 50%. It's Persian oil. The Brits do the thinking. They find it. They do the drilling. But it's still Persian oil. But they get a 95% concession. The British then create the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, APOC. Eventually, when Iran changes its name from Persia to Iran, they rename it the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, the AIOC. What happens shortly afterwards is the Brits find oil in Iran. They find it in a part of Iran called Khuzestan. It's the southwestmost corner of Iran. They find oil and they're like, wow, good thing we already have this 95% concession in place. Good thing we already have the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. We can just go set up shop. Next, the British realize, well, if there's oil in Persia, surely there's oil in other places. And so they start looking around in what is today Iraq. They're walking around Mesopotamia, again, right? You're looking for black shale or hoping to get a squishy sound as you're walking. And they find it. They find it in northern Iraq, in what is today Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan. So now they go to the Ottoman Empire and they go, hey, we'd like to make an oil concession deal with you about the oil that you guys have here. And the Ottoman Empire went, oh, sorry, we already made one with the Germans, Britain's #1 arch rival. The British realize it's a good thing we've got Kuwait, because this is pre-pipeline. When you found oil, you put it on a boat and send it out to sea. So they've got to, if they find oil in northern Iraq, they're going to put the oil on a boat in the Tigris River, and it has to go past Kuwait. So the British see Kuwait as the location that they'll launch an attack on any German shipping leaving the Ottoman Empire should there be a war. And they'll just cut off Germany's oil supply. But again, right, this is still a coal-powered world, so this isn't critical anyway. Not yet. It will be, of course. But the British are thinking down the road. The British and the Germans are eventually going to fight it out. World War I, I'm going to burst a bubble for most of you. It's almost the 100th anniversary, right? It's just around the corner. World War I did not start because the Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated, which I believe we've already done the 100th anniversary of. The Archduke Ferdinand being assassinated triggered a series of events that allowed World War I to come into being, because you have to have a casus belli. It gave them the casus belli. The reason World War I came into being was this. Great Britain and Germany were about to go bankrupt. And the reason they were about to go bankrupt is they were in the world's biggest, nastiest ever, up until that moment, arms race. Building ships. Germany would pop out a battleship, and then the British would build two. The British would build two for two reasons. One, the German battleship was better quality than the British battleship. So if they just built one, it wouldn't match. They had to build at least two. But the other reason was the British didn't want parity with the Germans. They don't want equality. They want superiority. So they figure if we build two, even if the German ship is worth 1.5, we'll maintain our superiority. The problem then is, once the British build two, then the Germans feel like they have to go build another one, which then forced the British to build two more, which then forces the Germans to go build another one, which forced the British to build two more. And the next thing you know, these two countries, all they're doing is building battleships. And at some point, they were going to have to fight it out. They just simply couldn't ignore this anymore. And so they used the Archduke Ferdinand, both states. Both states are equally evil, right? I know you want the Germans to be bad. I have bad news for you. The Brits may have been more evil, up at least until that point. Certainly in terms of the number of people killed. The British are orders of magnitude more evil at that point. Maybe once you throw in World War II, the British aren't as evil. But up until that moment, the British were certainly more evil. In any case, World War I happens, and it's a nasty, vicious affair. And there's some crazy side effects. There's some crazy consequences. First, let me tell you about the naval conflict, right? The reason they're having World War I is because of this naval arms race. So you would think both fleets, the German Imperial Fleet and the British Royal Navy, they're going to clash and solve this once and for all. And they fight one battle. It's late. I think it was 1917. The German Navy comes out of port, 2-3 years into the war. They're approaching Britain. The British Navy comes out of port. They meet in the North Atlantic. The North Sea. They fight they fire a little bit of shells at each other. The Germans lose their nerve, turn around and start heading back to port. The Germans sank more ships, sank more tonnage, but the British chased the Germans back into port. So the Germans said, we won. The British said, we won. The reality was it was a big stalemate because the German Navy was intact. The British lost more ships, but the Germans failed to stay at sea. So they both lost. Neither side won, and that was it. That's how the war ends in terms of Navy battles. And the German Navy gets cut to pieces because they lose the war. So there's no actual resolution of this big naval thing that they were putting so much money and effort into. Irony of human stupidity, right? Just at least fight it until they all sink. At least make this worthwhile. You're going to kill 12.5 million people on land. At least have a big naval slugfest and do this right instead of whatever that nonsense was. The big consequence, though, for U.S. foreign policy purposes is this. Well, before I do that one, let me do the other one. It also pulls us into the industrial mass export business. Because when Germany, France, and Great Britain stopped producing goods to sell to the rest of the world because they're now producing, they took those factories and now they're producing weapons, right? Instead of producing shirts, they're now producing uniforms. Instead of producing cars, they're now producing tanks. Because Germany and Great Britain and France, the three big industrial powers, do this, it allows us, with all our industrial might, to just move into those markets. So now we've got a big share of the global export market. The next major thing is this, though. The British carve up the Ottoman Empire, and they take Palestine, they take Jordan, they take Iraq, and then the French are going to take Syria, and they're going to take Lebanon. And the reason this matters is that's actually not what the British wanted. What the British wanted was Palestine and Jordan, and they wanted southern Iran. That's where their oil was headquartered anyways, in southern Iran. So the British are a little upset about this result. So what happens is when the British don't get southern Iran, the reason they don't get it is because Russia has a communist revolution. The Russians were supposed to invade Iran from the north, the British from the south. They were going to cut the country in two. The British were going to take the southern part with all the oil, and the Russians were going to take the northern part, and then together they were going to divide and conquer and smash the Persians. Without the Russians, the Brits can't do it alone. So the Brits changed their mind on who's going to get Iraq. Iraq was supposed to go to France. The Brits grab it because they know there's oil in Iraq. The reason this matters for us now is because of what's going to happen next, and it's called World War II.